time, the bus. Heading east. I've always wanted to get back to the ocean. Ever since I was a kid. Oh, I've loved the sea. We spent plenty of time by water these past years, but lakes, they're not the same. The bus will be okay. I'm not into flying these days. Too risky. Not dependable. And the train, well, it's way too expensive. Anyway, I've got the time, and they do say getting there is half the fun. Glad I got a seat to myself, though. Oh, I don't want to sit next to someone chatty, someone who tells you all about their innermost secret life, or who their grandfather was, or why they don't like eating Brussels sprouts. Or someone who's talking loudly into their cell phone at someone who's talking loudly back. No headphones. And then people who eat messy food, chew with their mouth open, stuff their faces with greasy junk food. Smelly. Probably because of the food they eat. And then people who twitch, they can't sit still. And then those who are too big for their seat and ooze over into mine as if it's their right to do so. Get irritated with me if I try to claim my own space. Anyway, I heard about this guy on a bus a few years ago. He got his head cut off. Well, not very good publicity for the bus companies, if you ask me. Still, you can't just stay home. I mean, you gotta take chances sometimes. You can't run around being scared all the time, like a bunch of sheep. Run the other way if you so much as look at them. Well, something like that could happen anywhere these days. People are crazy. Oh, crazy. Oh, I guess we're off. Bit of a jerky start. I hope this guy knows how to drive this thing. I heard about this guy on a bus in Mexico. The bus was running, it was heading down this road, music's blaring. The driver gets up and starts dancing with one of the passengers. People are laughing, egging him on, till some guy starts screaming at him as the bus is coming towards a corner. Stupid idiot driver. He just got back to the steering wheel in time. He could have killed a bunch of people. Some people think they're invincible. Show-offs. It's all about them. No regard for other people. That's why the world is in such a mess. Oh. I'm tired. 7 o'clock. Think I'll catch a nap. "8:55? Slept a lot longer than I meant to. But then I have been awfully tired lately. No routine. Now that'll do it. Met this guy recently, sitting at the counter in this diner. Used to go there to have my breakfast. He was just sitting a couple of stools down. Place wasn't that busy. Well, it wasn't the best, but it was close to where I lived. Yeah, lived. Moved out. Rent went up. No sooner had I retired than the rent goes up 30%. Still haven't found a place I like for what I can afford to pay right now. So I'm living in temporary digs. Now that's another reason I'm heading east. Not just to see the ocean. Well, I do want to see the ocean. And I've always had this fascination with old lighthouses. I hear they're plenty plenty of them out there. My great-grandfather, now he was a lighthouse keeper back in Scotland. Never knew him, of course. It's just going to be a holiday. Haven't had a real one in years. Got this chest thing. Cold, I guess. It's not really a cold. More like a cough. Not really a cough either, more like congestion. At first I thought it was COVID, but apparently it's not. Anyway, the ocean's good for congestion. Salt air, it's good for the lungs. Oh yeah, that guy, the one in the diner, he had this accent. Aussie, I think. Well, I'm not sure. I didn't ask him where he was from. Huh. You can get into real trouble asking questions like that these days. He had long hair, messy, well, tied up in one of those girly man buns. Said he played in a band. He had long fingers, amazing. Nice guy. Younger than me. The face. It was familiar somehow. Anyway, we got talking, said he was missing his lady friend. He was on tour. Well, I think it was a lady friend. Might have been a guy friend. Can't tell these days. Oh, we didn't get into that directly anyway. He did ask me if I had a partner. Now that's the safe way of asking. Or spouse. Now you can say spouse. Yeah, it's neutral. You can't make assumptions these days, which suits me. Now that's what we were talking about. Assumptions, or the lack of them. He was surprised when I told him I was retired because he figured I was a lot younger than that, 55 maybe. So when I said I was retired, he assumed I was 65 or maybe a little bit older. I'm going to be 75 my next birthday. Now that's the kind of assumption a guy like me can live with. I didn't tell him that I thought he was older than it turned out he was. No, some assumptions are good, but now some you're just better off to keep to yourself. Trouble is, you can't always tell when to do that, so caution is good. Caution is what? Valor. No, it's discretion is the better part of valor. He said to me, George, I think you're the kind of guy that's going to like it out east. Asked me how long I was going to be there. Well, I told him I didn't know. I was surprised to find out there's no train service out there. Or buses. You're going to need a car if you want to get around that province. Not like in Europe, I guess. Buses and trains will take you everywhere, not just in the cities either. He said he played a lot of gigs out east. Places like Moncton and Halifax and Sydney and, well, a bunch of places I'd never even heard of. Fiddle, that's what he plays. When he found out I didn't know anyone out there, he wrote down the name and phone number of a friend of his. Said she'd be more than happy to help me out when I got there if I wanted. Her name? Well, I've got it here in my wallet on a piece of scrap paper. Lousy handwriting. Hard to read. Need my glasses, but they're up there in my knapsack. Looks like Agnes Day. Pretty sure it's Agnes anyway. Huh. I wonder if she's related to Doris Day. Doris Day. She was my secret love when I was growing up. I went to all her films, knew all about her. Now, she wasn't born Doris Day, no. No, she was born Doris Kappelhoff. wonder she changed her name. Who would want that moniker, especially in the movies? Well, maybe this Doris woman, or Agnes woman, is really Agnes Dageldorf. Who knows? Could be anything. What's in a name? A lot, I guess. I mean, Kappelhoff wouldn't have gotten her in the lights, not in Hollywood. Not back then, anyway. This chest. Maybe I should look up this Agnes woman when I get there. I'm not sure. I'm booked into a B&B when I arrive. I just want to hang out for a bit. My dad, now he was stationed in Halifax at the end of the war. The war. As if there's only ever been one. Second World War. He said that Halifax was a dreary place back then. But Bill, the guy in the diner, he tells me Halifax is a real happening place these days. At least, musically, I guess. It's on the sea, that's all I really care about. Oh, that was some bump. Must be in Quebec. I hear the roads are pretty rough there. It's looking built up. We must be getting close to Montreal. Thank God he's gone. He got on in Montreal. He never shut up. He had headphones on, bouncing up and down, making all these gyrations, letting out these loud sounds. Finally, the bus driver got up and told him to cool it. The guy looks at me and as if I'd spoiled his fun, as if it was my fault, as if I'd done something wrong. Well, it wasn't me. I was just trying to ignore him. Not easy to do that, let me tell you. Well, he must have gotten off while I was sleeping, because I only discovered that my knapsack was gone at the next stop. Had my sandwiches in it, and a few items of clothing and my glasses. Not my wallet or my phone, thankfully. No, they're here in my jacket pocket. Well, the bus has been a bit cool. My change purse, though, now it's gone. Loonies and toonies mostly, and a few small bills. Only about $30, I suppose. So I guess I was lucky. It's funny, it kind of reminds me of the last time I was in Montreal. I was 19 at the time, and I was working in a resort that summer east of Quebec City. I was on my way back to Ontario there just for a few days for my brother's wedding. It was just before I left that I discovered that my tip money was gone. Stolen. Well, I'd kept it in the dresser drawer in the staff lodging. Foolish, I know, but, I was young and trusting. Anyway, it was 50 years ago or more now. And $150 was a big deal. Might have even been 200. I was a good waiter. Anyway, it was more than enough to get me from the resort to Kingston, Ontario, and back by train. That's where my parents were living at the time. Anyway, I ended up having to hitchhike. Only got as far as Montreal. Pretty hard to get a ride through to Kingston. The roads around Montreal are a mess. Or at least they were back then. Anyway, I got dropped off in downtown Montreal. Didn't have enough money for the train or even the bus. I didn't know what I was going to do. And the wedding, it was only 2 days away. No credit cards back then, of course. Now, I did have a checkbook, but the guy at the bus station, he wouldn't take my check. Well, I had to pee. So I went downstairs in the bus station to where the washrooms were, and there was a bank of payphones next to the door into the washroom. I didn't want to, but I thought about calling my parents to see if they could help me out somehow. I didn't know how, and it would have had to have been a collect call after all. Anyway, just then, I see this gaggle of nuns standing by the phones. Oh, back then they still wore those burqa outfits. Well, not really burqas. I mean, you could see their eyes and their nose and their mouth, but well, that was about it. They were speaking French, of course, and back then I still spoke a fairly good French. Not Quebec French, mind, no. No, when the other waiters at the resort got talking amongst themselves, I'd get lost. I'd get a headache trying to understand. But I did speak French. I mean, I had to. I was working in Quebec after all. Dad, he got me the job, a business connection. Well, my mind started working apace, and I got up the nerve and I went over to the one who looked like she was the leader of the pack. And I told her that my grandfather had just died and his funeral mass was in 2 days. I haven't a clue where that story came from. But in retrospect, it was brilliant. I told her I had to get home for the funeral, but I'd been robbed and I didn't have enough money for the bus. But I had a check and I could give them a check if only they'd loan me the money. Well, they were very sympathetic. And back then, I do think I looked like a real innocent, and angel even. Well, I put on a real show. I said enough of the right things. I wasn't even Catholic, but close enough. Anglican. I knew enough of the right words. Well, they did loan me the money, and I gave them a check to cover the money they'd loaned me after all, and it had my contact information on it, of course. Well, the wedding, it was a bust. Marriage didn't last long either. Never been a big fan of weddings. So I didn't hang around Kingston long. I went back to the resort till the end of summer when school started. Back then, I had my eyes set on a career in the diplomatic corps. That's why I'd kept up my French studies. Well, after I got back to school and been there about a month, I got this letter in the mail from some place in Saskatchewan, from a convent there. My check had bounced. Well, I was sure I was going to hell. I mean, back then I still believed in God, the punishing kind. Well, the letter was very nice, but it was guilt-inducing. You see, what must have happened was that at the end of the summer when I was going back to school, I'd cancelled my bank account in Quebec. So the nuns can't have been very prompt about cashing my check because, well, I know I had enough money in that account when I gave it to them. Anyway, to this day, I don't know why I simply didn't go to the bank to get cash before I headed off to Kingston. But I had been depending on that tip money after all. Guess I wasn't thinking too clearly. Well, I wrote them the nicest letter of apology, and I explained what must have happened. And I enclosed a check for the money they'd loaned me, and I added on a nice little amount as a donation too. Figured I needed all the help I could get in life. Maybe they'd pray for me and would wipe out the little lie I told them. Never heard back from them, though. So I've never really known what side of the divide I'm on. Explains a lot about my life. Never did go into the diplomatic corps, no. No, I dropped out of school. It was in the 60s. And back then you couldn't be a homosexual and a diplomat. They were afraid of blackmail, thought you'd be a pushover. Oh, they were talking about changing the laws, but it wasn't happening quickly enough. Not for me, anyway. Anyway, I would have made a lousy diplomat. Never suffered fools gladly. Don't like pretentious people either. No, I'm a down-to-earth sort of guy. Call a spade. Probably why I never got ahead in life. Looks like we're stopping. Oh no, I think a nun is getting on. She sat next to me, the nun. My luck. She only stayed on to the next stop at Fredericton, and she was nice enough. Young, too. I mean, these days you can hardly tell they're nuns anymore. They don't wear the same outfits they used to. Except some of them wear a little headdress, and their outfits do tend to be grayish in color. Of course, they're wearing a cross on them somewhere. She read much of the way, or tried to. She hummed a bit too. The tune, it's in my head. I've heard it somewhere before. She said she was a teacher. We talked a bit. Well, quite a bit. Well, I guess I did most of the talking, but she started it after all. She asked me where I was going. So I told her. She said that I should try to get to Cape Breton while I was in Nova Scotia. Told me it was a special place, and if I liked the sea, I'm going to like it there. Trouble was, she said, it's a bit far from Halifax, and if I didn't have a car, it was going to be difficult for me to get around there. It's the second time I'd heard something like that. And she said if it was meant to be, it would be. Well, I told her about the woman whose name I've been given, who might be able to help me out a bit when I get to Halifax. She smiled and said, it's good to make use of resources that are offered to us. She had the sort of face that let you know you could tell her your innermost secrets. I chatted away like a wren. But she had asked me about myself after all. Only I don't think she was expecting the encyclopedic version that ensued. I told her it had been a difficult 10 years since my partner, David, was diagnosed with cancer. Oh, I didn't use his name, David, no. I used that indefinite, partner. But she was smarter than I thought. Quickly referred to David as him. I told her we'd had a good life until then, almost 30 years at the time. We had a nice house, we traveled, and then David had to go on disability. Fortunately, our income stayed pretty good, but it was a difficult time. And then he died just after our 41st anniversary, almost 4 years ago now. We went into debt, paying for all those drugs that weren't covered and all those trips to Mexico to see natural healers and all kinds of therapies. Well, David wanted so desperately to hang on to life, and well, I wanted him to hang on too, but it was exhausting. We ended up having to sell our house. And I had to give up that promotion, the one I'd wanted, because, well, I couldn't take on any more responsibility. And then, when he died, I was relieved at first. Well, until the emptiness set in, and the financial mess we were in, it took its toll. I had to make some hard decisions. I'd worked past retirement age, I had to, and then I retired in the last year of his life, so I could look after him at home. I was glad I was able to do that. But my lamb was dead. Yes, we called each other Lamb. We got that from older friends of ours. She always called her husband Lamb. It stuck. Sometimes David was lamb chops, and if he was in a teasing mood, I'd be lamb droppings. Just to ourselves, of course. But one lamb is lonely, a lost creature. I was lost. David was dead. My partner and best friend was dead. People I'd worked with for decades quickly forgot about me after I retired. But then I had been preoccupied with looking after David for so long. And there I was stuck living in an apartment I could no longer afford. Never really liked it anyway. I had to get away to figure things out. She listened quietly, the nun. She didn't say much. I asked her name. Sister Susan, she said. She was on her way to Fredericton, to a Catholic school there. She taught biology and music. Said she was originally from Cape Breton. Her father had a farm there, a sheep farm in some valley. She said it was beautiful, pastoral. I asked her about that tune she'd been humming. She wasn't aware she had been humming. She apologized, said sometimes she just catches herself. I told her not to worry. It was just that, well, I'd heard it somewhere before. Only I couldn't remember where or even why I remembered it. She said she didn't know what she'd been humming. She hoped it hadn't bothered me. I told her no. She asked me if I liked music. Well, I had to laugh. I mean, I do like music, but I don't play any instruments, and I have a terrible singing voice. Music was compulsory at our school. Only the teacher would always say, "George, just mouth the words when we're singing." Sister Susan frowned when I mentioned that. She said she hoped I'd find happiness again in my life, and she felt I would, she said, because she thought I was a good person. She didn't use the G word or the J word. No, she only said that I had to have faith that I was capable of a good life. You see, she talked about goodness, not godness, and I related to that. When David was so sick, I didn't experience God in action, but I did experience a lot of good, caring people. She told me that life was a journey, and I had to be open to embracing the new sights and the new sounds. Then as she was getting off, she stopped and turned back towards me. And she called out and she said, "Agnes Day, lovely. Have a nice journey." And then she was gone. I didn't remember speaking about Agnes with her. I must have, I guess. I talked about everything else. That tune. It's in my head. Probably will be now for the rest of the trip. When we got to Moncton, the driver got off to have something to eat. So I got off to have something to eat too. After all, my sandwich had gone off with my knapsack. While I was sitting there, I noticed this framed picture hanging above the counter. Oh, it was a bit worn. Well, it was of this very tiny lamb curled up tightly in a snowbank. And there was this dog, a border collie, I guess, standing over it with its head raised, barking or howling, I suppose. Well, the waitress, she noticed me looking at it, and she told me that her grandmother had the very same picture hanging in her house and she'd always loved it. She explained that the lamb had been lost in a snowstorm, and the shepherd's dog had found it and was raising the alarm. It was a very powerful image, a lamb and dog. While I was sitting there eating my burger, there was this guy at the next table. A sailor, it turned out. And sailors like to talk. I know. I was on the ships too till I was almost 31. Almost 10 years at sea after I dropped out of college. So we had a lot to talk about. I never dreamed when I was growing up that I'd be a sailor. Well, I didn't really know what I wanted to be. So, after I dropped out of school, I went off to Europe for a year, just hitchhiking around, staying in youth hostels, hanging out. Well, I had this book, Europe on $5 a day. Might have even been 10. You could do Europe on the real cheap back then. Well, I ended up in England that Christmas. And I met this guy in London at Trafalgar Square on New Year's Eve. A Portuguese sailor. After the midnight celebrations, we ended up back at the place he was staying. Oh, a tiny room. A garret, I think you'd almost say. Anyway, I lost my virginity that night. A late bloomer, I know, and the only time I've ever enjoyed losing something. He was a nice guy. We hung out together while he was in London. I always thought sailors would be rough fellas, but he wasn't. No, he liked classical music, fancy food, nice clothes. And he told me, he said he thought I was the sort of guy that would like it on the ships. Talked to me all about the places he'd been. It sounded exciting. So when I got back to Canada, I joined the Seafarers International Union. Had a contact. Traveled all over. Saw things I'd never dreamed of. Earned a bundle. Spent it too. Haven't thought about that time in years. The people I met, the places, memories. I remember this one time I got very drunk in a bar in Cape Town. We were only in port a couple of days. I got seduced by a woman. Her name, Margaret. No, Marguerite. Yes, Marguerite. Nice woman. Bit older than me. An artist of some sort, I think. Anyway, it didn't do the trick. No bells went off. And I quit going to sea soon after I met David. I was 31 at the time. He was 25, just finishing up law school. I couldn't believe that a young lawyer would be interested in me. I mean, I never graduated from college, no. No, after I quit going to sea, I got a job in a bank. Well, I worked my way up. You could do that then. But I always missed the sea. Oh, we'd spend plenty of time by the ocean when we went south on winter vacations, but it's not quite the same. Still, we had a very good life together until he got sick. Maybe I should look up this Agnes woman when I get to Halifax. I mean, Sister Susan said we had to take advantage of opportunities that present themselves to us, or something like that. And if I like it there, maybe I should buy myself a house with a sea view. It has to have a sea view. I hear real estate's still relatively inexpensive there. In some places, anyway. Maybe I should get myself a car, too. David would like that. And it seems I'm going to need one to get around there anyway. But I haven't driven in years. I haven't needed to in the city. I mean, if we needed a car, we'd just rent. David, he did most of the driving. In more ways than one. I never minded. The bus trip was pretty good, for most parts of it anyway, except for that creep who ran off with my knapsack. I got myself a new one. Oh yeah, and then the woman who got on the bus just after Moncton plonked herself down in the seat next to me while I was sleeping, poked me in the ribs, woke me up, said I was snoring. I thought she'd be okay at first, until she started complaining about my elbows and her ribs. Well, it's pretty hard to sit like this for long periods of time. I must have slipped. A little while later, she poked me in the ribs again, said I was humming, and it sounded like a cow in heat. I wasn't aware I was humming. Not out loud, anyway. It's that damn tune, the one Sister Susan had been humming on the bus. Then, a little while later, she gets up and says that she doesn't give a round damn who my Scottish grandfather was, and she stormed off to the back of the bus to an empty seat back there. I was just trying to be friendly. Anyway, it was my great-grandfather. What a grouch. Well, Agnes has been a big help anyway. She's been taking me around places. She tells me that Bill is coming into town in a few weeks to play with his band. Well, their tour out west got cancelled. Due to COVID, I think. Bill, she calls him Willie, he was the son of a friend of hers. Came to Canada 30 years ago. Left South Africa at the age of 19 to get away from apartheid, I think she said. It's funny. I could have sworn he was Australian, an Aussie. But then I've always gotten the South African and the Australian accents mixed up. But you'd think I would have known. Agnes said that Bill's mom died a few years ago. She'd been a single mom raising him. And Agnes says she was a wonderful artist, too. She came to Canada after Bill, just for a vacation, and met this guy in Montreal, married him. Agnes said that Bill's birth father, she calls him the sperm She said he was a merchant sailor, a Canadian. Well, this was all a bit too strange. There were just a few too many coincidences. The timing, the place, the event. Well, I just had to ask Aggie. Now that's what she likes to be called, Aggie. I had to ask her what Bill's mum's name was. Maggie, she said. Like Aggie, but with an M. No, I said, come on. What's her full name? Marguerite, she said. Marguerite Van Reed. Why? Oh, nothing, I said, just curious. I don't know if I should say what I'm thinking yet. I think I should wait till Bill gets into town. Anyway, he might not even be interested in who his sperm donor father might be. I wouldn't push it. Oh, one more thing. It's Agnes Daigle. D-A-Y-G-L-E. Not Day. Bill's handwriting isn't very good. In fact, it's downright awful. And I didn't even have my glasses anyway. Aggie laughed the first time I called her after I'd been in Halifax a few days. You see, well, of course, I'd asked to speak to Agnes Day. She said it wasn't the first time someone had called her that. She asked me if I knew the music. What music, I said. Well, she hummed it. No, she had a nice voice. But it was the same tune that Sister Susan had been humming on the bus. I told Aggie that the tune had been driving me nuts. It had been buzzing around my head practically the whole trip. She told me it was Mozart, an ecclesiastical song, Latin, Agnus Dei. It means Lamb of God. Worthy is the Lamb, she said. Yes, I thought. The Lamb is worthy. I am the Lamb. I, George Taylor, am worthy. The whole trip, I'd been missing the signs. Lamb with dog, Lamb of God, Agnes Day, Agnus Dei. Well, Sister Susan said we had to take advantage of opportunities that present themselves to us, or something like that. So I'm staying in Nova Scotia, and I'm meeting up with Aggie in just a few minutes, and she's taking me to look at a used car a friend of hers is selling. And then next week, she just called me and said we're going to look at a little house up the coast. It's just coming on the market, but she knows it. And she says I'm going to love it. And it's within sight of an old working lighthouse. We went through most of our savings. But eventually I got that life insurance payment, and I do have my own pension after all, so I'm going to be fine. Sister Susan said, if it's meant to be, it will be. Que sera, Sarah. Hey, now that's my favorite Doris Day song.
When I was just a little boy, I asked my daddy, what will I be? Will I be preppy? Will I be butch? Here's what he said to me. Da 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 da. Da 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 da. Hey Sarah, da da. What will be, will be.